Hello and welcome to the Godless Moms podcast. There's been a while since we've been back, so things are a little rough right now. I was expecting the countdown. So today we have an amazing guest with us. It's SASHA SAGAN, who is the author of For Small Creatures Such as We, Rituals for Finding Meaning in Our Unlikely World, which I literally just finished listening to like an hour ago. Which I was just telling you how weird it was that I was like listening to your voice and then there you were.
Hello, it's
me. This is, of course, my lovely co-host Janice too.
Hello,
and
everyone.
You can follow Janice at Divorce Religion on Twitter, and my handle is in my name right there. So let's start talking about your book, which I absolutely loved. I thought it was amazing, and I told you already too that it made me emotional at times. So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, first, thank you, and I just am so nice to hear that, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm sorry / thank you that I made you emotional. It's I grew up. My dad was the astronomer Carl Sagan, and my mom is the writer producer Andrienne, and I grew up in this household where wonder and awe and nature as revealed by science was the source of like so much beauty and joy. And as I got older, my dad passed away when I was 14, and I think that was really the first thread of asking myself, well, for those of us who believe that science is the pathway to understanding, and believe that there is so much profound joy in just understanding our place in the universe, how do we deal with, the parts of life that sort of call out for some kind of recognition, some ritual, some tradition, the right thing to say in the right moment, the right way to mark time? Because when you lose a loved one, whether you believe or not, or anything you believe, it cries out for some framework to process this loss. And many years later, I wrote an essay sort of about that and about, our relationship with mortality when we don't believe that there's anything after. And from there, I started realizing that other people also, have these deep questions and are wrestling with some of these issues, and that there's just so many other occasions in life that call out for that are not just, the heart-wrenching ones, but the really beautiful times of, a wedding or a coming of age, or, the seasons changing. And we have so many beautiful traditions and rituals around the world where when you just peel back that first layer of the specificity of the time and the place and the culture, you realize that what we're celebrating is really scientific phenomena. Biology and astronomy is at the root of so much of this. And that just made me so thrilled in this deep way that, it's so easy to put up these walls between one person does this way on this day and one person does this day, this way on this day. And just the idea that those divisions are artificial and we're really celebrating the same things and honoring the same things. That's what sort of motivated this book. And the research was so interesting and fun. And a lot of it is also just my own experiences in my own family life.
Yeah.
You make such a... Oh, sorry, Courtney.
No, you go ahead.
You make such an interesting point, because I feel like a lot of people like myself who came from a very strict religious fundamentals background we can actually be scared of ritual once we leave the church, because we associate it so closely and so tightly with religion. But I like what you say about peeling back that initial layer and seeing what's underneath. There are people all around the world in every different culture and people group that celebrate the new year whenever they celebrate it. We celebrate the springtime and things like that. It may just look different, but the differences don't have to. They can bind us. They don't have to blind us. We make that choice if we're going to allow the rituals to separate us or not.
I think that's a really good point about, for those of us who were not brought, I mean, I have some cultural Judaism that I got from my grandparents that I still mark in my own way, but nothing was like, forced on me. There was nothing that it was, at all dogmatic. And so I think that for those of us who didn't have a strict religious upbringing, it's a lot easier to say, oh, this is so beautiful, because we haven't had a traumatic association with a religious, a ritual or setting, or all the things that go along with it. And so I think that it does, certainly in the people I've spoken to over the last few years, it's much more difficult, I think, to come back to some form of ritual and some form of tradition if you've had a really negative experience with it.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be difficult. And I found that your book was kind of reminiscent of a lot of the stuff I've read from Joseph Campbell. Just the comparison of all the different myths and rituals and stuff like that. I just thought it was really amazing. And you obviously have the same gift of communication as your dad.
Thank you. Yeah. That's really kind. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a really, really good book. And I forgot to mention at the top there that you could, viewers can actually grab that at the link in our description as well, which I highly recommend doing. So was it a difficult book to write? Because there's so much about like your personal life and your experiences and stuff like that.
I mean, in a certain way, it's like was really cathartic, and like, writing that stuff down and expressing that, some of it's really personal. I don't know. It felt like in some ways like a really deep emotional relief. I think what hard for me, I'm very lucky in that I don't usually suffer from writer's block. I just suffer from making everything I've written down make sense in a linear fashion. And so that was really the trick for me. But we were talking about this before we went on air. But like, it is, a lot of it is really personal. And you had listened to the audiobook, which I got to record myself. And I was thinking about when I first started writing the book, I thought, well, if, they hire an actress or someone to record it, that'll be fine. And, whatever they think. And then as I started writing it, and there's all this stuff about losing my dad and, having my daughter and like falling in love with my husband. And I was like, I have to read this. I cannot have another person read this stuff. It's too personal. I would feel like very strange about that. But yeah, I don't know. It's amazing how often when you open up and you're vulnerable, that is really where people find real connection.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way about writing, and I have the same problem where it's more I'm just like the stream of consciousness and I have to find a way to direct it. I don't know. Okay, so like obviously you are a non-religious and a very scientific thinker. So this is a funny question in my mind anyway. Do you think that the gift of communication that you have, obviously you share with your dad and your mom, do you think it's hereditary? Do you think it's like genetic, or do you think it was
no, I think it's learned. I think it's learned. I think if you're raised by people who love to talk, and love to, love for you to ask questions when you're little and love to answer them. And and who are willing to expose you to good art, stories, and when you're old enough, movies and are able to talk about why something is interesting or why why a movie is terrible, and have that nuanced conversation about not just I liked it or I didn't like it, but talk about the way that a message, that's sort of braided into a story that may be, a children's book or anything else, the way that message is communicated and what the underlying idea is. I think that anybody who is lucky enough to grow up in a household, or even just, know someone who's willing to have those conversations at any age, can communicate beautifully in any arena.
Yeah.
Sasha, can you talk for a minute about the significance of ritual? Why is it important for us to share rituals or introduce rituals to our children in particular?
It's such a good question. I think it's really about marking time and processing change. And, you know, and a lot of moments and a lot of rituals are also about, you know, communicating values and other things. But I think at the core of why we long, or many of us long for something like this, it's because, you know, time passes. And I think we all felt this like at the beginning of the pandemic when everyone was home and we didn't know what was going to happen the next day, and every day was the same. And it was just like, was that thing that happened, was that 2 days ago or a month ago? Like, I have no context. You know, if every day is identical, it's really hard to understand that, you know, we are rotating and revolving, and days are going by and years are going by. And I think these changes that we experience, whether it's the change of the sun is set, it's nighttime now, or the change of a year has passed since someone you love died, or a year has passed since you got married, or since your last birthday, it's been 30, 40, 50 years since you were born. You know, all these things that like help us wrap our mind around the idea that these cyclical and permanent changes are always happening. And I think a ritual, you know, even if it's just lighting a candle at home, even if it's just this particular meal that you make at this time of year because these fruits and vegetables are in season, you know, anything that we do on that kind of schedule that we impart some meaning to, you know, I think it helps us understand where and when we are in our universe.
Mm-hmm. I think it also kind of breaks up the monotony of just everyday life, and it gives, like, at least for me anyway, it gives me something to look forward to. Like, I love Christmas, and I've never been religious one day in my life, but I still love Christmas, and I look forward to it. Like, I've already got presents hiding in this room, and like,
really,
hopefully your kids are not listening. I agree, especially for those of us who live very far from the equator. You know, when the days are very short and it's cold, and you know, it just cries out for, we need something to take the edge off, you know?
Right.
And it's like a festival of, you know, feasts, being together, gifts, lights. I mean, so many rituals, so many holidays are about lights. It's so profound. And just this idea that, you know, the winter solstice for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere in December, you know, which a lot of because of the history of colonialism and imperialism on this planet, the Northern Hemisphere holidays get celebrated in the Southern Hemisphere, where there were once holidays that were, you know, appropriate to those solstices and equinoxes. But for something like, you know, Christmas, Hanukkah, Nowruz, like these holidays that are you know, this, you know, when the days are really short, close to the winter solstice, you know, it's just like there's something so profound about it. And the idea that once we cross the winter solstice, the days will start getting longer again. Spring will come back. We can have total, for lack of a better term, faith that it will get better, you know? And it's like there's something about that is really profound and beautiful.
And I feel too that it's important for us to become intentional about rituals. So the farther our society moves away from that traditional community kind of society and into a more individualistic society, we lose rituals. We kind of get untethered from a lot of those things that we celebrated together. And it's largely because, you know, when the Industrial Revolution happened, then you're being paid for your time, and they don't want to have to pay you for all those holidays. So they're saying, no, from now you just got to do all that stuff on your own. We're going to do away with these. But it's important, as you say, to mark time with these special things that we can do together.
And I think also post-Industrial Revolution, while we're talking about the Industrial Revolution, it's also, we don't live in our groups anymore, right? You know, very few people live in a neighborhood with all their extended family. And I think that carving out those times to see each other when, pandemic notwithstanding, but to traditionally have that time where you say, okay, well, I have these couple of days and I know that I'm going to always go see my, parents or aunt and uncle or kids or whoever it is. I think there's something about that has such a different emphasis in a world where we're not all living together with our tribe all the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In all the research for your book, was there a ritual that stood out as your absolute favorite that you learned about?
It's really, really hard to come up with a single favorite, but I think one of my very favorites is the land diving in Vanuatu. So the coming of age ritual in Vanuatu, on this island in the South Pacific for young men, is it's something that the adult men do regularly, on appointed days, but it's something that when you're a young guy and you are old enough, you do for the first time, and it's you climb up to like a platform in the trees, like above your whole community, and there's like a pliable vine that is tied to your ankles, and your community is looking up at you, and you jump off like a bungee jump as this leap into adulthood. And like when you've successfully done it for the first time, it's like that is the entrance into adulthood. And it's like there's something about that it just crystallizes something about becoming a grown-up and like having to face the beauty and fear and sublime just like intensity of the real world. And there's something about that just really stayed with me as this perfect description of what it's like to grow up. And then ideally in this setting, your community rallies around you and cheers for you, and you have this moment where you've crossed over. And that's what I think so many of our rituals as human beings are. It's this portal, the rites of passage comes from this idea of this portal between one reality and another. And it's like, we don't grow up in a single moment. We don't go from childhood to adulthood in a single leap, but it's this little poem about that change. And I think there's something really, really magnificent about that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
so should we sign you up for bungee jumping off the CN Tower in Toronto?
Yes,
we can do that.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to be 39 years old next month, so I think I'm past the
we got to do it
for coming of age rituals. I think I'm here in adulthood. But no, I just think it's like so much of what we do is. And I don't mean this at all derisively. I mean this in a really positive way. It's a performance art piece. I mean, a wedding is a performance art piece, right? We have the set and costumes and a script and an audience, and we do this thing that's this, little play to explain to ourselves, to each other, that okay, these two people were individual people, and now we go through this portal, this ceremony, and they're together. They're a couple. They're married. And I think that there's something about that, when we look at the things we do and the things we do kind of automatically as this, I don't think that should take away. I mean, I love weddings. I don't think that should take away at all from like our enthusiasm about them. But I think it just says a lot about who we are when we look at them that way, even things that are really secular.
Yeah. Yeah. You put it so well. In the same sort of vein, were there any rituals that you didn't like that kind of turned you off?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really include those in the book so much. I mean, of course, we do horrible things as human beings. This has been a chronic problem for tens of thousands of years. We're kind of awful a lot of the time. But I think that what I really wanted to express in the book is the stuff that's like terrible, we can let fall away. Everything we consider traditional, like when people are really like holding on for dear life to things because they don't want to be the first person to not do something, even if it's maybe not a negative thing, but just this unbelievable weight of the generation saying you have to do this thing. All that stuff is brand new on the scale of human history. the stuff that we consider traditional is like 5 minutes old compared to how long we've been human beings. Unless it's like cooking a meal with your family, like taking care of your children, looking up at the night sky, being like, what the F is going on up there? You know, if it's anything else, it's new. And I think that there's something really valuable about saying, you know, the stuff that we don't need anymore and we agree is just absolutely either horrendous or just like not really that useful, we can kind of just let some of that stuff fall away and go forward with the stuff that's really beautiful to us.
And you know what? Not even just letting it fall away. For people who've come out of a really fundamentalist background and they are leaving that, they're closing the door on that, they can also incorporate a ritual into saying goodbye. It's good to have rituals around grief and loss and transition as well. Make it purposeful. You know, you had a big celebration. You had ceremony and ritual to mark your marriage. When you get divorced, if you get divorced, that, you know, look into what you could do for yourself, also to help you in that transition, because rituals are really great bookends for transition.
Yeah. And it's so true. And it lets you wrap your mind around the change. You know, when you just stop doing something and you sort of never think about it again, or never sort of deal with some part of you that maybe feels some sadness about letting something go, or even enormous relief, but it just needs to be said. You know, I think there's something really valuable about being able to articulate, whether it's literally verbally articulate it or just to yourself in some ritual, some little way, that chapter is closed, and that, you know, change is the only constant.
Yeah, that's so true. I can't really think of any rituals that I've stopped doing.
Are there any you've started? Have you started any?
Yes.
I feel like a lot of people during the pandemic have started new rituals.
That was actually a question I was planning on asking you, is if you actually started any pandemic rituals. Yeah, there's, with our family, like we have on New Year's Eve, my husband and I, we started a ritual of making homemade chicken wings with a bunch of different sauces. I know we love food, so that's one of them, but not, I don't think we've, like, here in our little small town, the pandemic hasn't really hit very hard, so life kind of has seemed a little bit the same. But I imagine in a big city like Boston, it's probably still pretty hard to go and do normal things.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a good place right now, relatively. I mean, anything is better than like at the very beginning when it was like going to, you know, when there, you know, and we had, our daughter's 4 now, but she was like 2.5 when it started, and it was just like there was like one point when the playgrounds were closed, and we were just like, this is not this is not good. But in the meantime, you know, now I think things feel a lot better than they did then. But there are some things that, you know, we started doing during that time that, you know, we still carry forward. And there's a little national park like half an hour from here that we had never been to before, and we were like, we have to get outside. Like, where can we go safely where we can walk around? And like the facilities and everything were closed, but the trails were open, and we started going there. And I remember one day our daughter was like, when things go back to normal, can we still go to the forest? And we were like, yes. I'm so sorry we haven't been doing this whole time. But you know, that was really became like a really beautiful weekly thing that we were doing as a family that really we needed. And also then we started reading about like forest bathing, Shinrin-riku. I'm not saying that correctly, but it's this Japanese like ritual and art of like surrounding yourself in the forest and what that does for you. And there's this book that was, you know, written by a medical doctor about all the benefits of it. And we started really having this like deep emotional connection to going on this little outing every week. And so there's stuff like that definitely enriched us even in a really difficult time.
Well, thank you for telling us what forest bathing actually means, because it is not what I thought it was.
No, it's fascinating, and it's like a thing. No, you're dressed usually, but no,
Right.
it's just this idea that there's so many biological benefits to just being in the woods for human beings, and that we evolved from creatures who were there a lot, and there's a deep connection there, and I think it's there's so many things like that, so it's like this intersection of nature and science in this beautiful way where we realize why it's so meaningful to us.
Yes,
it really is too, and I live right at the base of a trail that goes up Giant's Head Mountain, and there's a bunch of different trails you can go up, but I walk my dog up there every night, and you can feel it, like you feel recharged. You get out there. It's I don't know. I'm not, I don't have faith. I don't believe in like destiny and stuff like that, but it's like you're supposed to do that, It feels like you're supposed to.
But there's a totally scientific and secular reason for why that could be. But I think that it's like to still have that to be able to marry both the like research and deep understanding of like what it's actually, which chemicals are being released in your brain, with the idea that it's still profound and for lack of a better word, magical, and for lack of a better word, spiritual.
Yes.
And it's still like, I think that's the key to all of this for people who are not believers, is finding a way so that the more deeply we understand something, it doesn't lose its magic, and that we can find that like joyful connection even when we know exactly how it works, and maybe even more profoundly when we know exactly how it works.
Yes. And when people find out I'm no longer religious, they'll say, well, but you're spiritual, right? And then I'm like, well, that depends on what you mean as spiritual. If you're talking about believing in a deity, believing in supernatural, believing in woo, no. But if you're talking about a feeling of connectedness, which I hear you referencing in being in the forest and being out in nature, 100%. I absolutely feel connected to the earth and to nature when I allow myself to go into those spaces. And it's important. It almost can be like a reclaiming of what religion tried to take and twist into its own thing. And
absolutely. And I think, for most of human history, the more deeply we felt connected to nature and the more deeply we understood nature and how it worked, the more closely, the closer we felt to our God or gods. And it's only really recently, my mother calls it post-Copernican stress disorder, like after Copernicus, things really went awry. And like this idea that understanding how something works and understanding our connection to it in a scientific way, in an evidence-based way, shouldn't make us feel less of that, for lack of a better word, spiritual thrill. And I mean, for me, the number one is like going into the ocean. Like the ocean is like, how can you have the experience of getting into the ocean and not feel that hugeness of nature and that beauty of it, and that we are connected to how everything works on this planet? And I think that, spiritual, it's so, I get asked about this all the time, and there's a struggle so much with this word, and like sacred and holy and all these words that I do use and I do like to use, that have this really, really heavy religious connotation. But I think that English is a language that developed and evolved among mostly monotheists. And so it's reflected in the language, but I think that words, like rituals, change over time. And as we go forward, words, the meaning, the connotation, the nuance of words change. And I think there's a way to use those words to capture something that doesn't require a theistic worldview.
Yeah. As someone who was raised by atheists, and they took me traveling all over the world, and like we lived in Australia. I had my son in Mexico, and so like I've been to so many different places, and my whole entire life, like as a child traveling with my parents and as a teenager traveling with my parents, I would sit on like these tropical beaches in Fiji and stuff like that and just be like, completely overwhelmed with that feeling, and I would call it sacred, and I would call it a spiritual moment and stuff like that, but I never meant anything to do with any kind of a religion or deity or God or anything like that. So it's I didn't even know that like people would assume you meant something religious when you say that stuff until I was like in my 20s. So you can absolutely use all of those words to mean that, for sure. And it's funny because it wasn't until I was in my 20s or 30s that I realized that a lot of people think that non-believers can't experience that feeling. Like, we can't experience the awe and the wonder. There's that famous interview with Oprah. She's interviewing Diana Nyad, the Olympic swimmer, and she reveals to Oprah that she's an atheist, and Oprah's like, so you don't feel wonder and awe? And they have this back and forth, and Oprah cannot wrap her mind around the fact that she doesn't believe in God and she still feels these feelings. And she like ends the interview just saying, well, to me that means you believe in God. It's just like,
it's like we have to define our terms. Like, if God is not, if it's a feeling, if it's not a omniscient or omnipotent creator, then that's a very different definition of God. But I'm sure that is the definition. I mean, I can't speak for Oprah as much as I'd love to. No, but I think for sure there are people who see that as what God is. But then I think, well, is that really the same thing, or is that because it feels scary to say I don't believe in God, and we don't have a language around this other thing that the three of us are talking about, and maybe your listeners understand, but maybe many millions of people experience and think and feel, but don't have a way of talking about it that doesn't feel like it's just the abyss void of just total existential crisis, just jump on in and fall forever and ever, and like nothing ever makes sense or is okay ever again. And it's not like that. I just public service announcement, it's not like that.
I think one of my favorite quotes that I think comes from you, and I just heard it the other night. There, but by the grace of chance go I. That hit me like a ton of bricks, because coming from a religious background and being out of it and accepting the randomness and the chaos that actually is part of the human experience, to have to replace the name God with the word chance just was so profound to me. So thank you for that statement. It's such a good one, such a great, honest way to look at
things. Thank you. I think, and I think it's one of those things. I mean, that's really kind. Thank you. I think it's one of those things that's like, for those of us who have been really fortunate, and I'll speak for myself, I've been really lucky in a lot of ways, and I grew up with everything I needed, and all of these things. My life now, I have everything I need. And if you think that everything happens for a reason, then there's some explanation why somebody else doesn't have everything they need, or their life has been really difficult, or they've had a lot of pain and loss, beyond what we all experience at some point. And I don't think that there's a reason that somebody else has had a harder time. I don't think that except that it's just that's how it all shook out. And I think that idea should give those of us who are non-believers, I hope, an impetus to make the world more just and more fair, and to try to correct some of those injustices. Whereas I know that, the vast majority of religious people, it's not, so much of what's positive about religion is the impetus to help others and do good. And, that's sort of what is great about it. But I think that if those of us who, don't think that there's anybody, giving the bad guys their comeuppance and the good guys their reward, I think we have to, in small ways and large, whether it's how we vote or it's, where we volunteer or donate, find a way to make that more a part of secular culture and more a reflection of our worldview, because I think that, you know, if you're lucky, then that's so great and worthy of celebration, but it also, you know, is a reminder that not everybody has it so good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point that you made in your book too, was about how you know, we can also build community around like volunteering and donating and just trying to be the change you want to see in the world, basically. And that's something that Janice and I were pretty active in doing, lots of nonprofit stuff. So something else that I definitely wanted to ask you, especially in this time, is that like your dad, the way that he made Cosmos and the way that he communicated was in such a way that, like, I know he probably got a lot of people's backup, like a lot of religious people, but for the most part, he was able to break through a lot of those boundaries between the secular world and religious people, and a lot of religious people heard him and loved what he had to say. Do you think there's a secret? Do you think there's something to it, to how he was able to communicate without being threatening to a lot of people who would have otherwise found that information threatening?
It's such a good question. I think it was a very different time, for one. You know, there was a lot. I mean, it was 40 years ago that it aired, or maybe a little more. And you know, I think it was a very different time, at least here in the United States. You know, there were fewer television channels. More people watched the same channels and got their information from the same place. It was on PBS, which, you know, is the public television station here. That, you know, when no one had a cell phone and no one had on demand and no one had Netflix, like, people were watching the same thing in a way that was, they didn't already have a wall up of, well, oh, this is on this network, and so this is going to be this. And, you know, I think that I think the culture was different, but I also think that his manner and the way that he and my mom wrote the show together and the way that he was as a person, he really he was genuinely had respect for people, and he genuinely wanted to have those conversations. You know, it was not like a soundbite zing kind of thing. It was really about, you know, even if someone disagreed with him, he valued so much having a real deep conversation with another person. And, you know, people in our life and friends of his, you know, who are just totally different theological perspectives. For example, you know, it was such a joy for him to like have a few hours to spend with someone and have a really deep, profound conversation that was also, you know, at times humorous and lighthearted. And I think that there was something, you know, about that. He was also just in general like a very like not a defensive person. And I think that there's something about that where if someone confronts you or, you know, raises their hand, like if he was giving a talk somewhere with a really like combative question, like he just wasn't defensive. You know, I mean, everybody's a human being, and I don't want to like be, you know, paint a picture of someone who had no human qualities, but by and large, you know, I think it was like he really had a deep and profound and beautiful way of getting to what was at the root of the question, without, you know, getting the sort of interference in the way that is what we all have. You know, so many of us have so many walls up, and it's just like immediately we recoil at a certain, you know, oppositional perspective. And I don't know, he was a really amazing person, and he really enjoyed having those conversations with people, even people who, or maybe even more so with people who disagreed with him.
Yeah, I think that really came across to me. Just the way that he would talk in Cosmos and in The Demon Haunted World. That was such a fantastic book.
That's like there's so much in there that is like really hauntingly prophetic about this time that we're all living in.
Yes. I think there's a passage that gets shared around.
Totally. Yes.
Totally fits right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Like in a way that is almost disturbing. I mean, I wish you had been wrong. I really do, but
yeah.
Alas.
Well, that leads into another question that I was going to ask was, how do you think he would feel about what's going on right now, like with all the anti-science and
it's a really difficult time. I mean, I'm so conflicted because there's part of me that's like, he would be so upset and it would be very sad. But then there's another part of me, maybe too optimistic and too hopeful, that is like, well, if he were here, he could really help, diffuse some of this and like explain to people in a way, like this idea that, like, I don't know, just this idea that research, like doing your own research is Googling, rather than like having double-blind experiments and like, having a control group and like spending years of, I mean, it's a war on science. It's also this kind of war on expertise. And I think that is so contrary to what he stood for. And like so much of what I admire about his life and who he was is like his willingness to, upon receiving new information, say, oh, I was wrong. We used to think this, we don't think this anymore. And how much of science is not a list of facts to be contrasted and compared with other lists of facts that come from other philosophies, but a method for understanding the world as it really is, separate from our fears and wishes. And I think that if we could, get to a place where like, we have to realize, like, we right now are on opposite sides of a continent and we're having a conversation. This is amazing. This is magic. And it is only possible because science and, the branch of science that is technology made this work through trial and error and actually coming to terms with what the reality is and making something work. And that is the method, right? We see it every day. We are all around us. We're the beneficiaries of how well science works in so many ways. And to say that the people who devote their lives to it, of course they could be wrong about stuff. Of course, people who have been brilliant in one area have been like absurdly wrong in other areas. But to at least start from the place of understanding what the people who have devoted their lives to something like, I don't know, the study of how viruses spread, for example, and just say that, well, this is the jumping off point. We have to at least understand what they've gotten to until this point. And sure, there are things that could be wrong that we believe in any arena, but that people who have spent their life trying to understand something are just making it up on the fly and just like playing some elaborate trick on everyone is just so bewildering. And I just think, there's this, we've gotten so twisted around in so many ways. And I think that I don't know what the solution for right now is, but for the long term, I think, at least I'll speak for in the United States, I think paying public school teachers like a lot more money and making that a job that people can really like live on, and teaching critical thinking and like really understanding the scientific method from children who are really young. And I think that part of the problem is that if we teach children, sometimes in a religious setting, not to ask difficult questions and not to question authority and just to take the answer that feels best instead of like wrestling with the information as we have it, it sets us up to weigh an opinion and thousands of years of research or information the same way, and they're just not the same.
Yeah, it's a crazy world out there right now. Like the comments, the other day I posted a big long like 7,000 word piece about arguing against all the points that anti-vaxxers make, because it's something that's just driving me crazy. Because I mean, we could be all back to normal by now if everybody would just go and do it.
Or we could all still be worrying about polio if we had done it the other way last time around,
Yeah. And it's the comments that I get are so like just mind-blowing. The fact that like you have to start from the beginning with these people, like from the very beginning. They don't understand anything. They don't understand even what science is. You have to like explain it to them that it's a method, and they think that it's, like you said, like a list of facts. But do you have any ideas how we would deal with it now? Like any ideas on how to communicate with people? Or
I think starting from a place of like where you can find common ground is valuable. And like, it's not, I think like, it's not like, I mean, it's not like, oh, the pharmaceutical companies have never done anything terrible. Like that's not like, of course, right. There have been terrible things have happened throughout history. And like, sure, I actually got into a little bit of a conversation with someone about this and really tried to be as respectful and calm as I could and understand what her perspective was. And it essentially came, and this is one person, so I don't think she speaks for, and this was somebody who did receive other vaccines for other for kids to go to school and stuff like that. And it was, I think for this woman who I was talking to, came down to this idea that if she had made a choice that resulted in something negative, she would feel worse than if she just caught something in the ether that resulted in a really negative result. And it was like this idea that by taking an action, like getting vaccinated, if there was a tiny, tiny chance that something could go awry, that was more scary to her than, and I was like, but like, of course people love to talk about like the long-term effects. Well, we don't know what the long-term is. It's like, well, we don't know what the long-term effects of having COVID are, and like, I think that listening is great. I think finding some common ground is great, but I think it really just comes down to teaching science early in schools to small children and understanding how we got all the things that we know now that we didn't used to know, and all the things that we used to believe that now it's hilarious, that whatever, the sun goes around the earth, and just coming to terms with the idea that we are just barely getting our bearings in this universe. And the only pathway that we've ever discovered to really understand what's going on in a reliable manner is science. And this is how it works. And I think that there's something about that shouldn't be controversial, because every one of us every day is benefiting from centuries and millennia of advancements and ideas that have been tested. And it doesn't mean that tomorrow something couldn't be disproven, but this is the best thing we've got going.
Yeah.
One thing that sounds similar between your upbringing and the way that I've heard Courtney talk about raising her family is the idea of prizing curiosity over obedience. And I know Courtney's talked about that quite a bit. And if her child comes to her and says, I don't understand this, or I don't know about this, and she'll say, well, let's figure it out. Let's do the research together. Let's find out about it. And I think that's such a powerful part of parenting that can be missing if you're really trapped in a rigid fundamentalist mindset and you're being controlled by fear rather than by a desire to get to the actual truth of things. Right. So I'm amazed to hear you talk about your dad, because it's hard to imagine having a dad who was not threatened by different ideas or new ideas, and who wasn't a total authoritarian. Like, he sounds pretty warm from what you're saying.
He was really warm. He was really wonderful. And I think that, there's something about that question of like adults, even, like just our fear of admitting we don't know something. And I think that, he was pretty confident about what he understood. So if you could ask a question to which, even as a little kid, to which he didn't know the answer. And I write about this in the book, like this idea, they'd be like, this was like a thrill for my parents. And then this is like back in the day, so we would go look it up in the encyclopedia. And like, you know, this idea that like, you know, we could like ask questions that were deep enough that we didn't know the answer, and there was nothing to be ashamed of to say I don't know. And that what would be really not great would be to make up an answer or discourage questioning, because we're so uncomfortable, and we all are at different times so uncomfortable with just that empty space of not knowing. And like, right, whether it's trying to predict what's going to happen tomorrow, or you know, how something's going to go that you're waiting on, or whatever it is, that discomfort that we all have with not knowing, and just sort of trying to get comfortable with that. And I think that in terms of not shutting out the, you know, the outside world, not shutting out contrary ideas, I think people who are religious, who've read my book, which to me is like one of the most wonderful things, is when I get to talk to someone who has a totally different perspective but took the time to read my book. And one of the things that I've noticed that they express, more than a few people have expressed a lot of surprise about, is that I talk about how like my parents were very willing to like let me like, you know, experience and attend religious you know, like to go to church or to go to different places. And like I had like a wooden toy like Noah's Ark, and that it wasn't like, not only were like, you know, monotheism wasn't censored, it was like they would have thought that I had not received a proper education if I didn't understand the tenets of what, you know, a billion people believe around the world, and not just Christianity, but or Judaism, but you know, all sorts of other religions around the world, and that was enriching me to understand what people believed. And I think that that's so powerful, this idea that like censorship, it just doesn't work. I mean, like, you know, don't let your like 4-year-old watch The Shining, but like, you know, I just like, I mean, I'm not like totally, you know, an extremist here, but like by and large, like it just doesn't work. Keeping an idea out doesn't work. And it's just, you know, it never gets the result that you really want. And it's so hard. And I think just letting whatever is out there, you know, in and grappling with it, understanding it, and wrestling with it, and seeing what it, you know, evokes, and what contradictions and what similarities there are, is really beautiful.
Yeah, I think that like along those lines, something that I always kind of believed is that when you do that, like when you block something out of your kid's life, they're going to come across it eventually anyway. And you have a choice. You can either bring that in and have control over the conversation and answer their questions in a safe place, knowing what they're learning and everything like that, or you can let them figure it all out on their own. Somebody else teaching them, you know, who knows what they're being taught and what questions they have that aren't being answered, right, and stuff like that. So my parents didn't teach me. I've said this a million times on my channel. My parents didn't teach me about religion. I didn't really understand what God or church was until I was like 13 or something. I just thought people were really weird. But it was, I definitely am trying not to do that with my kids. I want them to know, because that's the context of the world that they're growing up in.
Yeah.
And the like, eventually they're going to come across it. I did. And they're going to have questions, and they need to have those questions answered. It's the same thing. It's the same reason why we talk to kids about sex and drugs and all this. Someone's going to teach them. Someone's going to teach them about it. Better to have control over it. Yeah,
and there's some nuance in the messaging you may want to really make sure is, you know, comes across. And I think that, you know, it's also just, I think when you emphasize, I think so much of us think about like, well, it's either no religion or religion. But I think that one of the things I try to emphasize, even with my daughter who's 4, you know, is this idea of like, there's, I mean, no religion. And then there's countless other religions and religions that don't exist anymore, that people believed fervently for hundreds of years, and religions that are new and religions that are old and have changed. And like, you know, her great grandfather, my husband's grandfather, passed away, you know, a year or two ago. And we, you know, went to at church because he was Christian, and and had a memorial for him, and just this. I tried to instill, like, we have to be really respectful, and this is a quiet, serious place, and this is what he believed. These are all different kinds of buildings all over the world for what people believe, and where people come on important days when something has happened, like when someone's died. And, this happens to be the kind of building that represents the beliefs that he had, but there are all sorts of different ones. And I think that there's something about that where you can be totally respectful and even have, show some reverence for the beliefs and for the person you loved, in this case, without saying that it's us and them, or something like that, without saying like, well, this is the other way. It's just one of the other ways. There are so many. And for each person, each family, each little group over the course of history, it's been a little bit different.
And I like the idea of developing rituals within our family, from the time our kids are little, because that is potentially going to really increase our cohesiveness as a family unit. So then our kids do feel comfortable to come to us and ask us questions because we've had all these experiences together. So excellent parenting. Way to go. Wow.
We'll see. She's only 4. Come back to me when she's like 15 and I'll let you know how it worked out.
4 is so fun. 4-year-old.
It's so much fun. Just like getting to have full conversations and like hearing the questions. I like always joke with my mom friends. I'm like, I was born for the like why phase. Yeah. Like I love it. I'm like, this is what I've been waiting for.
Yeah, I love that too. I have a 2-year-old. Well, she's just about 3. I have a 2-year-old niece who has her whole life basically has been the pandemic.
Yeah.
How is that impacting your daughter?
It's so strange. She's extremely outgoing and gregarious. Mm-hmm. Can't imagine. I think it's that I don't know if that's learned or genetic, but she definitely has that like social element. And it was definitely once it was clear that like playing outside with a mask on, she was really good about wearing the mask because she was already 2 when the pandemic started, so we all started wearing them at the same time. I think it's much harder when your child like turns 2 during the pandemic and then you be like, now you have to wear this. But so she's, it'll be, I think in the long term, we'll see. And she's, the only one so far, so I don't have anything to compare it to, but I think she does have like an appreciation and a enthusiasm about being around other people and getting to go somewhere. And as things have gotten better and we've gotten to have like, a weekend with friends here and there and things like that, I think, and, figured out how to do these things really safely you can just tell, like, if we spend like Friday to Sunday with another family with kids, it's like on Monday she wakes up and my husband and I are like, she's just like more grown up and like has more words and like, so, and it's just like, it just underscores how much like being together, some people are introverts. I'm like, that's awesome too. But like, it really underscores how much like being together enriches us, and finding ways to do that is really meaningful. And I think that if, we can find those little silver linings that sort of refocus us on what's important, I certainly have a new appreciation for all those moments that we get to spend in our like group settings that for a while there were really, really tough to come by.
Yeah. Yeah. We just had it in Canada. We just had Thanksgiving yesterday.
Right. Oh, yes. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And it's nice to have everybody over last night. I think it was last year we couldn't. Could we?
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah. So it was nice to do it again this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like all this like autumnal stuff. I mean, Thanksgiving is complicated in a lot of ways, and I write about that in the book. But when we sort of take the historical element and put it to the side for a moment, the idea of like the harvest festival and just like this time of year it's so ingrained in us how much like the season's changing, and like pumpkins for Halloween and like all this stuff that's so much about nature it's like all around us and we're so removed from it in this way. I'm like apple picking, just like everybody apple picking on Instagram, which is like all the time. And like, I'm like, there's got to be a way to like rebrand it from like a, influencer's little like photo shoot to this like pagan harvest festival thing where we like all go out and like get these beautiful apples that nature has given us this bounty and the seasons changing. And I feel like there's a way we can enjoy all these things from this sort of secular scientific perspective with a lot of, maybe a little tongue in cheek, but a lot of enthusiasm.
Yeah, for my family at least, it's foodie season.
Yeah.
Like it's when all the best ingredients are available and all the best dishes can be made. And summer food is great, but there's nothing quite like a big bowl of brothy noodles.
Oh, that comfort food.
Yeah. Definitely foodie season. We had a comment when we were talking about just exposing your kids to all kinds of different things from Randolph, who is actually the president of Canadian Atheists.
Hi, Randolph.
And he said, my wife and I have been bringing our kids to the pride parades in Vancouver almost every year. We're there to answer their questions. And when younger, they didn't notice the nudity. And I thought, that's awesome. I would totally take my kids.
We do that. We do that. And I think that that's really underscores something. I mean, I don't know, Randall's, what if he's a member of the LGBTQA community, but like for us, I'm married to, a guy, and we would always go to, Pride even before we had our daughter. And just this idea of like, well, lending, if you're in a position of privilege and you have an opportunity to lend your voice or just your standing there to a group that has had a harder time, I think there's something really powerful about that. And now we, there hasn't been Pride the last year or two in Boston, but we would bring our daughter, and just like this idea, like even explaining to a very, a young kid, whether they are getting it or not, that like they're like, all these couples love each other, like mom and daddy love each other, and for a long time they weren't allowed to get married and have a family, and that was not fair. And now things are more fair, and so that's what we're celebrating, because love is so great. And like just having like that context and this idea, and like I've taken her to more than a few protests and over the last couple of years, and just this through line of it's our responsibility when someone's not being treated fairly, even if it doesn't affect us personally, we have to show up for them. And I think that there's a way to do that from a really early age that doesn't make it like scary or strange. And it's just like, this is part of what it's like to be a member of this species.
And there, but by the grace of chance go I.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Let's be responsible with what we have and share it and encourage other people and support other people. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. We don't have Pride here because there's 13 of us basically. We do have a rainbow crosswalk.
There's one rainbow flag, right? Also, like who does? It's just like so aesthetically pleasing, and like children, like who's not gonna love like rainbow stuff and like sparkly things and floats and music? I'm like, who doesn't want to show up for that?
Yeah. And I would have done it when my kids were young, and even though there's nudity, I don't care. Nudity.
Yeah, and it's like, same.
All right. Well, it is 2. I could talk for another hour.
I mean, what? So much fun, really.
Very cool. Oh, where are you? Come back to us.
Did we lose your audio? We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
There you are.
Oh, there you go.
My AirPods, they died.
Okay.
Sorry. Terrible technical difficulties.
They don't last very long, do they?
No, they don't. And I've had these for a while, and the planned obsolescence really seems to be kicking in.
Yep. I think I'll get a different pair next time. All right. Well, it was really awesome for you to join us. This is amazing. And your book was awesome, and I really, really enjoyed listening to it. We're doing renovations in our kitchen. I'm like painting the cupboard doors, just like, wiping tears away. I've got like paint on my cheeks and stuff like that. It's really good. And everybody watching and everybody who's going to be listening to the audio version later, go buy it. You won't be disappointed. Absolutely worth it.
Yes. For small creatures such as we, rituals for finding meaning in our unlikely world is the name of your awesome book. And we're so grateful that you wrote it and that you shared it with us. And I am just going to give a quick mention to any of our Canadian viewers. This Thursday, I'm hosting a webinar online for non-Indigenous Canadians who are interested in becoming better allies to our First Nations people. So I think we'll have the link to that webinar in the information.
Yeah, it's in the description. And with that, thank you very much for joining us. And this was awesome.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Take care of yourself. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.